You're listening to the Fed and Fearless podcast. On this best of episode, you'll hear from Maria Claps all about how to have optimal hormone health after the age of 40. So stay tuned. Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, a registered dietitian, nutrition business coach, and online entrepreneur with over 10 years of experience in online business. And I'm here to show you everything I've learned about creating a life and a business that nourishes you. On this podcast, we'll talk about the lifestyle habits, practical strategies, mindset shifts, and leaps of faith required to build a healthy body, a powerful mind, a strong spirit, and a successful business. Hey there, Laura Schoenfeld here. As you probably know by now, I am on maternity leave, and as part of our strategy for making sure we're still putting out great content for you during that time, we are sharing our top downloaded episodes from the Fed and Fearless podcast since it started back in 2019. The episode today is with Maria Claps. It's all about hormone health after 40, and whether or not you're over 40, I think this is something worth thinking about, especially if you are a little closer to that age like I am. I'm 35 now, and so it's definitely something I'll need to be thinking about as we're getting closer to the age of 40. But it is something that I think does not get enough attention, and that's probably why it was one of our most popular podcasts. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and we'll be back very soon with new content when my maternity leave ends later in September. See you then. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm your host, Laura Schoenfeld, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic in women's health that does not get enough attention for some really unfortunate reasons. Now, as many of you know, a lot of the hormone health topics that I personally cover as a health expert tend to revolve around women of premenopausal age. It's primarily because that's where my expertise lies, and it's also a very important time of women's life for optimizing hormone health, not only for personal health reasons, but also for things like fertility and pregnancy and all the things that go along with being a woman. However, after menopause is another really, really important time for women's health and hormone health especially. And it's something, again, that this topic does not get talked about often enough. And unfortunately, there's a lot of secrecy amongst women who are in that age range where they're not necessarily talking to each other and they don't really know how to healthfully manage the symptoms that they're experiencing. So that's why I'm so excited to have on the show with me today, Maria Claps. Maria is a certified health coach, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and mom to 4 grown boys. After receiving inadequate health care that did nothing to address her perimenopause problems, Maria enrolled in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in order to help herself. After that, Maria pursued several hormone-centric trainings, including Dr. Sara Gottfried's practitioner hormone training program, the Functional Diagnostic Nutrition program, and she has also been mentored by hormone scholar and scientist Dr. Lindsey Berkson. Maria helps women all over the world as a perimenopause and menopause mentor. She's a Dutch hormone test expert, and she also teaches practitioners how to help midlife women thrive in a mentorship program called Midlife Hormone Mastery. When she's not working with clients, Maria can be found trekking through Italy at farmers markets locally or in the kitchen creating recipes. And like I said, the reason I was so excited to have Maria come on is because the topic of menopause is not one that is necessarily the most fun to talk about, but it's certainly an important topic for women's health. And Maria does an awesome job of going into the details of what women should expect leading into menopause and then during menopause and post-menopause as well. So I'm so glad to have her on the show today. I know you're going to learn a lot, and I hope that you enjoy. And without further ado, here is Maria Claps. All right, everybody, I am so excited to have with me on the show today, Maria Claps. Welcome to the show, Maria.
Hi, Laura. So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have had a lot of people in my audience asking for more information about menopause. And even though I know some things about menopause, it's definitely not an area that I do a ton of work in or a ton of research in, mostly because I tend to focus on more of the fertility and premenopausal years. So I know that there's going to be a lot of women listening that are excited that we are talking about menopause. So just to kick us off, I would love to hear your story. How did you become a health coach with a focus on peri and postmenopausal women's hormonal health?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. Okay. So at about age 42, I had some perimenopausal symptoms. I didn't even really know what they were at the time. I just felt that things were way different. It wasn't until I kind of mentioned it to my mom. So thankful to have, my mom and her wisdom. She was like, I think it's perimenopause. And that sent me into obvious research. And we had always been kind of holistically oriented. So I was, happy to dive into the research. That was like almost 10 years ago. And I just was having the symptoms where like I wasn't sleeping well, I was gaining weight, and my mood was a big issue. And I was like, oh, this is just absolute misery, just misery. I went from being like normal cycles every 28 days, like clockwork, to, abnormal cycles, which, to be honest, didn't really bother me that much. It was really mostly the mood and the insomnia. And that was what set me off on a journey. I consulted with a doctor in New York City, got some help, not a lot. And then I just decided, Laura, I said, there has to be a better way. It can't be just about like taking a truckload of supplements and, drugs. And I'm not against any of those things by any means. And I just said, I have to go back to school. I was like, I have to go back to school on this. And that was my health coach journey.
Wow. So what were you doing before all of that?
Raising 4 kids, Yeah, I never really worked in corporate. I worked for small companies, which is being a stay-at-home mom with 4 kids who are now in their 20s. So,
well, I certainly wouldn't say just. I feel like raising 4 kids is multiple full-time jobs. So I wasn't sure. It sounds like the health journey, the health coaching journey really just kicked off then. And it's not like you had been a health coach before that then became interested in menopausal hormonal health. So sounds like your experience and the challenges that you faced finding answers for how to feel better and how to manage that transition period healthfully was really what kicked off your desire to become a coach. Is that right?
Absolutely kicked it off. And I had always been health aware and health conscious and questioning and skeptical and contrarian and not willing to just accept things at face value. And that's where I just, like I said, I need to learn more. And that's what kicked it off. Yeah. So definitely my health journey was a major catalyst.
Mm-hmm. Which is not unusual, but I think something that makes your story a little bit unique is the age at which you started all this, because I feel like so many women, when they get into their 40s, they unfortunately believe that there's no way that they could have a career change or that, they're kind of on the tail end of life. And it's, I think, just really inspiring to hear that you started this whole new career in your 40s, which I think just proves that it's never too late to follow your passions. Now, I would love to hear from you because you said you started to experience these symptoms in your 40s, and that's not, I wouldn't say it's like freakishly young, but it's definitely younger than I think a lot of other women will experience that menopause transition. So what were some of the first health changes that you noticed when you started to go into the menopause transition?
Yeah. So moody, not sleeping well, and moody, and then just starting to gain weight. So yeah. And I would say that happened somewhere between age 42 and 43, which, the average age of menopause for Western women is 51, but like kind of normal to be anywhere between 45 and 55 to be fully menopausal, not the menopause transition, fully menopausal, 12 months without a period. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those were the things that kicked it off for me.
Now, when you said that your period started to get irregular, what was that like? Was it just disappeared? Did it start to get lighter? Did it just kind of come irregularly? What was that symptom like?
Yeah, so it would be like, okay, so it wasn't every 28 days, like then it would stretch out to 30, and then maybe the next one would be 35, and then all of a sudden it was like, I just had it 3.5 weeks ago, like 21 days. So that's definitely what I actually call that kind of late stage perimenopause at that point, when your period's that irregular. And then in my case, and in the case for a lot of women that I've worked with, menopause is probably not too far away when your period's starting to do that.
It's interesting because I've worked with some women before who were in their 40s dealing with hypothalamic amenorrhea. And that's where it can start to get kind of confusing, because those women lost their period, but it wasn't because of menopause. It was actually because of excessive dieting and over-exercising behavior, or, a variety of things that can trigger hypothalamic amenorrhea. So it's interesting that the shorter cycles and then also just the irregularity, but they're still coming, could be a little bit more indicative of menopause than just a basic disappearance of the menstrual cycle right off the bat.
Sure. Yep. Good thing to distinguish for sure.
So with the mood changes, was that something that was affected by not sleeping well, or did it seem like it was completely separate?
Yeah, it definitely felt separate. It just did, because it was whether I slept good or not, there were mood changes. And so now we know that's really associated with, it could be real sharp increases in hormones or like the withdrawal of hormones.
Yeah, I feel like the hormonal shifts are ones that we expect around our menstrual cycle, but we're not necessarily prepared for the changes that happen going into menopause, because nobody really talks about it. So it's like, you're not exactly sure what to expect when that is happening. And actually that brings me to my next question, which is, what are some of the biggest myths that women believe about menopause?
Right. Well, that's a great question. So I think women, they tend to feel like, my kind of biggest issue is just this mindset of, well, this is what it's like to get older, and I'm going to put on weight, and I'm going to lose my libido, and, I'm, going to be just kind of, I'm going to isolate and be asexual. To me, that's definitely a hormone imbalance or loss of hormones. It's not aging. Yes, there's going to be, some changes in immune health, and most women at menopause are going to put on some weight. There's no way around it. But as far as like just becoming this, overweight, like I said, asexual, just woman who isolates herself and, can't really contribute to the world anymore, that's completely false. That It does happen to a lot of women, but you don't have to go down that path.
Now, why do you think that's something that happens to so many women?
So, we have the loss of hormones is extremely profound. And unless you've A, studied it, but B, experienced it, I don't think you really fully understand what that means. So I do think a lot of that is the loss of hormones. Now, it's not the only thing, lest anyone thinks that, it's all about, if you have observed my work, you'll know I'm a huge fan of replacing those hormones, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. It's certainly not a standalone. But when we lose those hormones, and it's so funny. Like, I know to ask this question. I don't know if too many people would know to ask it. A lot of women will self-isolate. Now, they don't actually say, I'm self-isolating, but they're like, they don't want to go out anymore. Like, the girls' nights out, they're a thing of the past. They would rather stay home, stay in their pajamas, not wash their hair, not get all prettied up to go out. And that's because it's just too much trouble. Well, look, I'm a homebody. I just changed out of my pajamas like about an hour and a half ago. I love my home. It's my solace. But so for people that also love that, I want to say, I hear you. But if you went, say, in your 30s, early 40s to someone who was sociable, who was going out, who was just happy to converse and to meet people face to face, and then all of a sudden, like, something's wrong, like you're curling up with that ice cream, or you just, like, again, this is a little bit touchy to mention this, but like, you've stopped caring about your appearance. Again, I feel like I have to make the disclaimer: appearance is certainly not everything. That's a bit of a red flag to me. And a lot of that to me has to do with the hormone imbalance and or loss of hormones, because they animate the brain. They animate the neurochemicals, the neurohormones. And, when that stuff gets disrupted, then that starts showing up in, how we move, how we think, how we move about this world.
And I think it's important to recognize that something can be a symptom of a problem as opposed to something that people just need to accept as a part of getting older. And like you said, I think there's a fine line between being, sucked into the whole vanity thing and worrying about your appearance versus just not caring anymore. I mean, I feel like we've all had moments in our lives where we go through a period where we're like not really caring about like what our hair looks like or how we're getting dressed in the morning. And there is something to be said for the mood impacts of just kind of letting go of any sort of care about your appearance. So again, we don't want people to think that you have to be dressed to the nines every time you leave the house. But if you used to be someone who enjoyed taking care of your appearance or enjoyed getting dressed nicely, or like you said, going out with your friends or going out with your husband, something like that, and if that just stops, then that is more unusual and possibly more of a health symptom than something that we just have to expect as we get older. Now, as far as expectations go, again, I'm in my early 30s, so I'm a little bit of a I got some time before I have to necessarily start thinking about this stuff for myself. As you get into your 40s, is this something that you hear from other people that are telling you what menopause is like, and that's where the expectation is coming from? Like, where do you think women are hearing what's normal and what's not normal when it comes to menopause?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's a bit of cultural expectation, and then just maybe like being around women that are in the throes of like that late stage perimenopausal journey or are menopausal. But like, for instance, almost everything about menopause. So if you're creating graphics and you're in Canva, there's the menopause like stickers or elements, or on Instagram, they're very negative. They're very negative. So we have this cultural expectation that menopause is going to be negative, or like, who hasn't heard? I think, Laura, even in your early 30s, you've probably heard about, the 7 dwarves of menopause, like the itchy, cranky, sleepy, and I hate that because it's spreading such false expectations. And, women go into it more fearful, and it's kind of created this societal feeling about like women who don't talk about this and who don't share their journey and, seek. And if you're already told this is what it's going to be like, why would you think that it would be anything different if that's the cultural narrative? And that's exactly what I'm trying to work to change.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of similarities with that experience in menopause as there is in, so many topics of women's health in general, especially things like menstruation and then postpartum. I feel like unless it's related to childbirth, it's almost like there's no conversation about it. And like you said, even graphics that people like us who do blogs or do Instagram posts, and we're looking for images that are expressing that stage of life or that, that hormonal state for a woman. It's like, it's all just kind of misery that you're seeing these images of, oh, this woman's like grabbing her stomach because she's on her period and she's in so much pain, or someone going through menopause is, can't sleep at night, or whatever kind of image you're finding for that. And, compared to like the pregnancy images, which is all these women like, caressing their bellies and all glowing and happy and stuff. And so it's really interesting. It's not something that I feel like is talked about a whole lot, but it is kind of like a cultural undertone of, what women should be talking about and what's quote unquote normal versus what actually is normal. And I see a lot of that in the world of, just menstruation and women's health in general, let alone menopause.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Right. We've got the pregnant women in like this beautiful meadow with flowers and like this ethereal glow. But when you see like a perimenopausal or postmenopausal woman, she's just kind of thick at the waist and she just has a blank stare on her face. Well, I'm here to tell women it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. The default maybe is perhaps that way when we do nothing to support our health. And sometimes, Laura, we say that these, these jokes and memes and things, they come about because there is some accuracy in them, right? Like, why do we laugh at things, or why do we find this like common shared of, thread of humanity in certain jokes, even like the real funny ones, is because there is like this thread of we can identify with that. So maybe, the default is that we will tend in, that direction if we're not careful. What I'm here to say is, you are going to have some changes, body's going to change, things are going to change, but it's really manageable. And women can live, depending on what age you are when you go into menopause and really what your genetics are like, you can live literally 50 years after menopause. If the average age of menopause, let's just throw it down to 50. It's 51.4, I think. Well, let's just say 50. My grandmother lived to almost 100 years old, so it's entirely possible. That's half of a lifetime for some women. We need to make it good.
Right. Definitely. And I'm curious. So you've been mentioning that some amount of symptoms are normal. And again, I think that's something very common with women's health in general, even something like the symptoms around the menstrual cycle. A little bit of it is normal. We're not expecting it to be completely uneventful with nothing changing. What do you consider to be I don't want to say normal, because I don't even like the word normal. It's almost like if somebody was going to have an optimal menopause experience, what do you think they could expect when it comes to symptoms?
Sure. So I'll address the big, the big one, which is what most women are concerned about. There is likely going to be some weight gain. When that weight gain is in excess of 10 pounds, then we really need to be careful, because then is it menopause or is it insulin resistance? Is it menopause, or are you just eating the same way you were eating when you were 30 years old? Which that has to change too. So some weight, I think, is expected. A change from normal to expected, and that's because the theory is that the ovaries pretty much stop producing. And our main estrogen is estradiol. So that pretty much comes to an absolute standstill in the body. We produce mostly estrone through the adrenal glands, but our fat cells produce a little. So the overarching theory is the body stops producing estrogen, but the need for estrogen doesn't stop. So our fat cells are going to produce some. Now, I don't know if it's entirely true. I think it is, but then again, we tend to put on weight because we start to creep very slowly and imperceptibly towards insulin resistance. And why that becomes so easy, even if we're kind of eating the same and exercising, is because estrogen directs insulin. It just, when estrogen is low, women can slide very easily into insulin resistance. And that's why I say for postmenopausal women, you cannot eat a lot of carbohydrates. I'm not anti-carb at all, But if you are just like eating the way you did at 32 and you're 52 and, you ate, I don't know, I don't want to put numbers, 150, 200, 300 grams of carbs a day, and you have no estrogen left in the body, you're going to gain weight, guaranteed.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I actually had a similar conversation with Dr. Laura Bryden. I've interviewed her on the show. She was talking about PCOS and hypothalamic amenorrhea. So she is going to come back to talk about menopause related topics at some point, since it is such an important conversation. And her and I have talked a little bit about the insulin resistance that develops during menopause related to the drop in estrogen and how that affects carbohydrate needs. It also affects total calorie needs. I've also seen research that women's overall caloric needs go down. I think it's like 10, maybe 15% compared to what they would have been pre-menopause. So it's interesting because I feel like there isn't really a lot of guidelines around the menopause transition when it comes to dietary changes. And I'm the same way, where I'm definitely not anti-carbs. And a lot of my clients actually need to eat more carbohydrate to be healthy, but they are women who tend to be menstruating. And I definitely agree that many, if not most women, do not need as many carbs post-menopausal as they did pre-menopausal. So that's a really important distinction to say, that it's that drop in estrogen that greatly affects what our nutritional needs are. And it's not that carbs in and of themselves somehow cause problems for women. And it's interesting with the weight gain piece. Like you said, that's one of the more common symptoms. And I don't know if I've ever met anybody who went through menopause that didn't at least see a little bit of change in their body composition. Why do so many women struggle with weight gain after going through menopause? You mentioned the insulin resistance piece. I just mentioned the fact that their calorie needs might drop. Is there anything else that might be contributing to that in a postmenopausal woman?
Sure. So definitely lack of sleep, and which can also kind of, again, point back towards insulin resistance as the mechanism, and then stress. So, just having a stressed out body is going to make it much more difficult to lose weight. So it's not 100% estrogen and insulin resistance. I think adrenal health really plays a big part of just overall menopausal health and weight. I'll say weight maintenance, just like not continuing to go up. I spoke to a woman the other day who said she had put on 8 pounds in 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, we've got some investigation to do. And it's, while calories in, calories out, I think still plays a little bit of a role. We need to understand what's going on with your hormones, and it's not just your estrogen and progesterone, it is your adrenal hormones as well.
Yeah, 8 pounds in 2 weeks for sure is not something that would be normal, especially if it goes up like that and stays up. Now, something that I have heard before, and I can't remember, it's been a while since I looked into this, but I read that your habits and your hormonal health leading into menopause. So, someone like me who's in their early 30s, probably going to be looking at going through menopause in the next 15 to 20 years. I've read that our hormonal state, premenopausal, can actually affect how rough the menopause transition is. Is that true?
So yes and no, and it's individual. Okay. So remember I said when I went into perimenopause at or between 42 and 43, I always lived a very healthy lifestyle, like from childhood. My parents were sort of before their times. They weren't fanatics, but we didn't have sugary cereal. We didn't have soda except for a couple times a year. My parents to this day, real food, grow what they can, buy organic eggs, buy organic meat from a farmer. And so that's the way I was raised. Never a smoker, never used birth control in my life, never even used a toxic tampon, right? So pretty healthy, right? Never like got, didn't party hardy in college. In fact, kind of met my husband really young and didn't even finish my college degree until I was 40. There's another little thing. So background is pretty healthy existence. Still struggled a hell of a lot in menopause. So, and that just goes to show, and I've had so many clients who are, I think, similar or they can identify with, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I've been, managing my adrenal glands, I've been watching my stress. The deal is when that estrogen, progesterone too, but I really like to focus on estrogen, when it drops out, when it's like you pulled the floorboard and it's not there anymore. It could be, depending on your genetic sensitivity to what that drop is, it can just really be highly symptomatic. Now, in my case, luckily, like I started to gain a little bit of weight, and I have a little bit of postmenopausal weight, but I think if you were to look at me, like no one would say, oh, she looks menopausal. Like that, like kind of really thick at the waist and just like really kind of drawn and tired look. So I think that, all of the healthy lifestyle practices that I did absolutely helped me, right? Have a better experience than I had not had them. But I think it's a bit of a myth, and we just won't know until you go through that, or you keep a healthy lifestyle and menopause is going to be a breeze for you. That is not my personal experience, and that is just not the experience I have had with my clients. So clients who come to me, like they're already super savvy. They're already eating paleo, or they're eating the grass-fed beef, and they're not smokers, and they're not heavy alcohol users. And like me, they're struggling, and they're struggling primarily because their hormones are gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And like I said, I can't remember where I read it, but I think it was in a book, and I don't want to try to remember what book it was, because I think I'd have to look it up, but it said something about, just in general supporting hormonal balance and adrenal function before menopause affecting the symptoms. So I think that's interesting that people who you would argue before menopause were perfectly healthy, and then menopause hit them really hard, that didn't pan out for them the way that the book might have talked about. So, and I feel like it's kind of, everybody has to go through that experience of recognizing that their health is not 100% in their control. Cause I don't know about you, but I get a lot of clients who tend to blame themselves if their body reacts in a weird way or has weird symptoms that weren't really explainable. And I think it's nice to be reassured that you could hypothetically do everything quote unquote right and still have trouble during menopause. So it's not like, oh, only people who didn't take care of themselves have menopausal issues.
Exactly, Laura. And I agree 100%. And I even tell women, whether they're perimenopausal, menopausal, or just premenopausal, in that, when I talk to them and tell them what I'm going to do, I lay this out and I say, I have very reasonable expectations that this is the progress we're going to see and this is what's going to happen. I said, but I cannot guarantee you. Sometimes, despite our best intentions, the body doesn't exactly cooperate and do what we want. So, and yes, that totally applies to menopause. And I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying that you should not tend your health at every stage in life. Absolutely. I do think tending my health and not doing those things, not using synthetic birth control, not being, a drinker, not eating a lot of junk food, absolutely helped without a doubt. But still, when I experienced that estrogen drop, none of that stuff really mattered in terms of some of the symptoms, right?
Now, one thing that we've talked about a couple times now that I want to talk about the mindset piece, because something I do experience with my clients who have gone through menopause or maybe are going through menopause is this, I don't know if it's like a belief or a hope or an expectation that somehow they'll be able to avoid gaining weight during menopause. And as you mentioned, gaining up to 10 pounds through the menopause transition is pretty normal and not necessarily unhealthy, and possibly could even be beneficial based on the role that the fat cells play in producing estrogen. So what would you tell someone who is mentally struggling with gaining a few pounds during the menopause transition?
Yeah, it's funny. That's a great question. I'm thinking years ago when I had an in-person practice, I worked in a healthcare office, and I had this really adorable, petite, like 48-year-old that was just very newly menopausal, worked out, felt she cared about what she ate and how she kept herself. And she said, I have gained about 6 pounds. And I said, I hate to break it to you. I said, but that is completely normal. And you have to just, give your body grace and ease right now. So I think, Laura, it has to do with, we have these bodies that we're kind of used to behaving in a certain way for 40 or 50 years. And when things start to change, we think like that, well, why are we changing? And is there something wrong with me? And I just think it's a lack of education. Like we just don't know how these changes affect us physically and mentally. And we just like want to preserve and we want to hang on to what we've always known, and change is scary and it's different. I honestly, I just really think it comes down to a lack of intimacy with our body and that education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cause like you said, I mean, not that 6 pounds is insignificant, but that could be something that is completely normal. And like we said, even possibly beneficial during that menopause transition. And yet I think so many women are under pressure to keep their bodies looking exactly the same as they did in college or high school or something ridiculous like that. And I think it really does women a disservice to make them think that their body should stay the same throughout their life and to not see that change is natural. And again, like you said, if somebody puts on 10 pounds in 2 weeks and is continuing to gain weight and is experiencing other metabolic symptoms, like we're not saying that that isn't something to be addressed, but I do find that so many women really mentally struggle with that couple of pounds of weight gain. And like you said, it's a lot of times in the midsection, which is pretty much like the last place that most women want to gain weight. And so, I know it can be really tough to accept that that's part of the process, but I do think normalizing it is going to at least help people feel not like there's something wrong with them, that they're the only ones that are dealing with it, or that somehow that there is something that they didn't do right or some failure that led to that change happening.
I totally agree. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Awesome. And I know that one of the things that you do with your clients is Dutch test analysis. So first, I'd love to just kind of explain what the Dutch test is, because I know that I talk about Dutch tests all the time with my clients, but then sometimes I forget to even explain, like, what is a Dutch test? Why is it called a Dutch test? So if you could tell our audience a little bit about what a Dutch test is and explain why the Dutch test can be valuable for postmenopausal women. As I said, I use it a lot for my premenopausal clients, but I would love to know what kind of information can you gather from doing that test?
Absolutely. So probably the number one reason I love the Dutch test for any woman, but especially postmenopausal women, and even more so if a woman is on hormone therapy, is looking at how estrogen is behaving in the body. And we call that estrogen metabolism. And also, 99% of the postmenopausal women that I have tested with the Dutch test have come back exactly as I expected, which is super low estrogen and super low progesterone. But every once in a very rare blue moon, like I can count on one hand, I've had women in their early 60s who have a little bit more estrogen than I would expect to see. And then especially, which is not necessarily a bad thing, if the estrogen is behaving correctly in the body, and that's estrogen metabolism. And I don't know if you want me to go into the different types of estrogen metabolism, but it's a way of seeing, like, are you creating estrogen that's going to be more helpful or more potentially proliferative? And when we think of cancer, we think of like cell proliferation. So there are some estrogens that can cause more cell proliferation than others, and the Dutch test can absolutely tell us that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you want to just kind of give us like the big picture overview of the estrogen metabolism piece, because again, I think sometimes with the Dutch tests, if you don't work with someone who knows how to interpret them, it can be like, oh, you're in the postmenopausal range. Well, that makes sense. You're postmenopausal, and that's all they look at potentially. So looking at that metabolism piece, is going to be important. So can you just, like I said, big picture overview so that people understand why this test would be more valuable than, just going to the doctor and getting a blood test looking at estrogen?
Sure. Okay. So absolutely. So I'm still a big fan of blood testing, but blood test doesn't show us how estrogen behaves, estrogen metabolism. So we have our static number of estrogen, like just our amount on the first page of estradiol. That's the main female estrogen. And then we see on, I believe it's page 3, estrogen metabolites. We create 2, 4, and 16 metabolites. 2 is far less proliferative. It's the one we want to see the most of. If you have that's awesome. If you have 4 estrogen, then that is not good. We all have some, but we just don't want really much higher than 10%. And the Dutch test will give you an exact percentage of that, which is awesome. And then 16 estrogen is it's a little good and a little bit not so good. I call it nuanced. So it is the estrogen that maintains bone, which can be really incredibly important in menopause. Bones will degrade without estrogen eventually. So we do want to see a good amount of 16 estrogen, especially if a woman is also low in testosterone. So I haven't spoken much about testosterone, but the Dutch test will show us testosterone as well. So those are our 3 main estrogen metabolites is what they're called. And the great thing about that is unlike a blood test where you go to your physician and maybe your liver enzymes are a little bit high and the doc says, we'll just watch that. We'll keep an eye on that. No. When we have not a good ratio of these estrogen metabolites, we can take very aggressive lifestyle steps, certain way of eating and supplements to change what your percentage of those metabolites are, and essentially really end up changing potentially your cancer risk as well. So I think it's the number one reason I like the test is being able to see those estrogen metabolites. And I would say the second reason is love the big picture view of the adrenal glands. I think it's extremely helpful. And then we get a couple of other bonuses like B6 and B12. So.
Yeah. Well, and with the estrogen metabolism ratios, do you know if the expected percentages from the test, do they change depending on if somebody's pre or postmenopausal?
No, they don't change. That's a great question. But here's the thing, and this is why this is a little bit less of a concern for postmenopausal women. So occasionally, and I unfortunately do see this a lot in older women, which is not good estrogen metabolism. But if we have an estradiol of 0.10 and we've got an estrone of 2 and an estriol of 3 or 5, that's what we call almost non-detectable levels of estrogen. So our percentage of bad metabolism is not really an issue anymore. It's not a big issue. Where it becomes an issue is, we still want to see it. We still absolutely want to see it because it kind of shows us genetic tendency in a certain direction. And if, I did have a postmenopausal woman who kind of had enough estrogen in the tank to try a certain supplement that would help to change those ratios. But we still want to see it because it can show us that genetic tendency, and we still want to try to correct it with lifestyle, but it's not as important as when you're doing it in a premenopausal woman and you see that, if a woman has, estrogen that is robust and her ovaries are still cranking out a good amount of estrogen and she's got poor metabolism, then you really have a problem, which is, again, I'm going to say fixable. These things are quite fixable. I've seen so many before and afters. It's amazing how it can be fixed with basically lifestyle medicine.
Yeah. And I was curious about the percentages because I know on the test it gives different total ranges for things like the estrogen, different forms of estrogen, and then also things like the testosterone and androgens. So I didn't know if the expected percentage also changes with that. And it sounds like maybe it's similar or the same, and it's really more about the totals that are expected to change. Now you mentioned testosterone as being something that you're going to look at as well. And testosterone is kind of a funny hormone for women because we always think of it as the male hormone, but it can definitely cause problems when it's too low. So what would be some things that might happen to a woman if her testosterone gets too low?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to avoid the obvious one. We'll get to that. I think everyone knows probably what I mean by the obvious one with no testosterone or low testosterone. We'll touch on that in a second, but lack of agency, like lack of being able to be motivated and kind of take charge and kind of move through their life in a way that they feel good about themselves, ready to get out there and do things. So remember what I said about isolating oneself? I don't know for sure. I haven't seen it in the literature, but maybe testosterone has to do with that as well. So lack of motivation, lack of agency, lack of kind of engaged in life. The other one, which women love to ask me about, I'm sure you can guess it, is libido. Now, I have seen women with plenty good testosterone have terrible libido. So I always like to say, testosterone is a hormone, that is kind of considered rocket fuel for libido, but libido is so multifactorial. If you're not a happy person, not happy in your marriage, no amount of testosterone is probably going to overcome that. So it's multifactorial. And Laura, honestly, I've seen women who have kind of replenished their estrogen, worked on their health, not really worried about their low testosterone initially, and just working on their health with replenishing the estrogen and progesterone has completely brought back libido, even if testosterone is still on the low side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like libido is one of those symptoms that has so many different factors that play in. And yes, the hormones in and of themselves being low can affect that, like you said, low testosterone, but it's certainly not the only thing. And like you said, sometimes it can really be more of a psychosocial issue than an actual hormone deficiency issue, or a combination of those things. So now with testosterone, is that something that women tend to need replaced, or is it something that they can start to make more of even if they're postmenopausal?
Yeah, so I don't think that all women, I know women don't need to start with testosterone. They need to start with estrogen and progesterone. And then perhaps 6 to 12 months later, if they need it, they can add it in. And again, this is now just me working with my mentors who are hormone doctors who have actually explained to me that if you can get a woman optimized on estrogen and progesterone, you might actually get her ovaries to make a little bit of testosterone, which I find amazing. But again, a naturopathic endocrinologist that I'm working with has said that, and my own doctor has said the same thing. Is he doesn't believe in, not that he doesn't believe in testosterone, but it's like we don't look at that for 6 to 12 months down the line. And then another mentor of mine has said that there's just this push on testosterone and she called it androgenized women. It's certainly a part of a hormone balance regimen, but I personally don't think women should be jumping to that right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like it's something that I see women that I work with who are put on hormone replacement. It's kind of interesting how fast they're put on testosterone. And it seems like something that could cause a lot of problems if it's done either outside of progesterone and estrogen being balanced, or just done in excess. Like you said, it can cause the high androgen type symptoms that are not ideal and don't create a great sense of health and vitality any more than low testosterone does. So, yeah, I feel like the Dutch test has so much information, and it's really interesting to hear how the interpretation is so different depending on not only the age of the woman, but also the menopausal state, since somebody could be in their early 50s and still be menstruating, or they could be in their early 40s and be going through menopause. So it's just kind of, it's interesting to hear how you can use these tests even after somebody's gone through menopause and their hormones are a lot lower than what they might have been premenopausal. Now, I would love to just ask you if you have a few practical tips that women can start implementing today to reduce their menopause symptoms. I'm sure there's a lot that can be done in general and probably way more than we would have time for to discuss in a single podcast. But what would be some of the low-hanging fruit that you would suggest women look into for getting relief from their symptoms?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things I absolutely love to do myself, and we're kind of moving into this time of the year, at least with our time zone where we are, and probably USA and Europe is, we're in spring. So we've got more light. And so one of the best things women can do, because the adrenals and let me back up. Let me go higher. The pituitary hypothalamus, right, kind of direct all of our glands. So we want to get that light in the morning so that we have that nice, beautiful adrenal rhythm where we can have that nice burst of cortisol after we wake up, getting that light in the morning, maybe getting a bit of more light exposure around noon. And when I mean light, and I had a client ask me this, is can I like sit at my kitchen table and get the light from the window? And you certainly can, but even better if you can get outside. So I have been, just taking my morning coffee and like almost as soon as I wake up, getting out and getting light. And that just sets your entire body, runs on this beautiful circadian rhythm. And it's directed by light. And then it's directed by lack of light. So really at night, we want exactly the opposite. We don't want to be around bright lights and bright screens. That has major impact on your health. So, and that can affect your hormones right there. So simple, easier in the spring and summer because it's got so much light. It's just, it's just nicer to get outside now into nature. So that is one thing right there that really everyone at all ages and stages could do, but like the longer you are on this planet, the older you are, the more dysfunctional adrenals, like life kind of creates a little bit of dysfunction in the adrenal glands over time as the decades pass by. So giving yourself that reset, free, healthy, so good for you. I would say that's just my favorite tip to give out, just that will optimize or at least start the optimization process for all of your hormones.
Yeah. And I can only imagine if somebody's dealing with insomnia. I know that my mom went through a period of pretty bad insomnia when she was going through menopause, and it's kind of one of those chicken or the egg scenarios where somebody who's experiencing insomnia a lot of times will get up and start watching TV or jump on their phone or their laptop or even their Kindle that's like reading a book, but it's backlit. And it's one of those things where getting all that screen activity at night is kind of the opposite of what you were just recommending. And yet people who are dealing with insomnia, a lot of times that's their go-to to kind of keep themselves sane when they're dealing with that lack of sleep. So I think and again, we're not saying don't ever watch TV or anything like that, but I think it's really important to be careful how you're dealing with your insomnia and not making things worse by getting a ton of screen exposure late at night or, in the middle of the night when you can't sleep.
I'll totally agree. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then there are the classic menopausal symptom is hot flashes. 80% of women have those. Sometimes they can just lessen on their own without any therapy, but for a certain percentage of women, they can last into their mid-60s. Nothing is as helpful if you really have them and they're bad as estrogen. That's the classic kind of medical indication, and that's a whole other discussion. But estrogen therapy, you could try fermented soy and flax. You probably need a therapeutic amount of that. And I don't know what that is, but I think it's worth a shot.
Is that a supplement or is there food that exists that could?
I'm sure there are foods, I think with genosine, so soy extracts, supplements, but I would say no. So when I think fermented soy, I think tempeh. I'm not like a big soy fan at all. I rarely eat it. I'm afraid of potential impacts on thyroid. I'm just not sure about that. But, if you want to give it a try, if you've got hot flashes, it might help. And that would be flaxseed, maybe just putting it in a smoothie, maybe making flax muffins. The only problem with foods as like functional foods that you're expecting to have like a real effect in the body is like you're talking a certain amount. That amount might be like 3 to 4 tablespoons of flax a day. That's a lot. So that's the only issue with that in terms of helping it to alleviate symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always kind of a trade-off with functional foods because, if nothing else, it can be a really large volume that has to be consumed. And, 4 tablespoons of flax every day just sounds like a lot. And that, that can affect gut health possibly. And we don't know, what other impacts that might have, especially with all the fiber. And then with the soy, like you said, I think there's a lot of debate around soy. I'm kind of on the fence about it. I don't think people need to eat a ton of it or that it's better than animal protein by any means. But I also think there's a lot of people that are very anti-soy. And like you said, I think organic, traditionally prepared soy in moderate quantities, maybe not like every single meal, but moderate quantities could be something that's beneficial for a woman that's dealing with those hot flash symptoms. And, I just think we all have to look at functional foods as being in context. So someone who has really low estrogen may have a different experience with that than someone who does not have low estrogen or has high estrogen, or like you said, has a thyroid issue. So, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think sometimes soy kind of has like a very black and white belief system around it. It's either, horrible and nobody should touch it, or people think it's like the way that you should avoid animal foods is to just eat a bunch of soy. And I don't think either of those are correct. So any final tips or strategies that somebody could implement, like just right off the bat, to potentially see improvement in their symptoms?
Well, okay, so I would recommend daily walking as well, so that don't necessarily think that walking is going to really move the needle on the weight that much, but it's just a great way to improve mood. And that is a big symptom. I would say like behind weight loss, like that's 2 or 3. Number 2 or 3 that tends to come in is just kind of a moodiness / low motivation, type of a mood issues in, perimenopause and menopause. So, just gentle walking, like committing to a half hour every day, I think it's really life-changing for most women.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like combining that with some sun exposure. So walking outside could be like a nice 1-2 punch for women to help them with a lot of the side effects of menopause, like the insulin sensitivity piece and the mood changes. So it's good to have something very simple. I think most people can do outdoor walking, maybe not year round, but at least during the warmer months, it's something that is accessible to many people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then Laura, like we totally left this off the table, and maybe discussion for another time or another practitioner even. And that is like, I am a huge fan of bioidentical hormone replacement therapy for so many women. Like they do all of these healthy things, like the walking and the sunlight that I just mentioned, and the, eating healthy animal protein and getting, vegetables that is appropriate for them. Loved what you said the other day about how that's not always the right thing to do. And, then the stuff just doesn't budge enough, or it's like I'm putting in all this effort and I'm getting very little return. Well, for those women, like the bioidentical hormone replacement therapy is extremely helpful, not just for symptom mitigation, but just for like long-term health strategy. I want to live to 100 and, not be a burden and, God willing, not be in a nursing home. So again, we didn't cover that, but that is something that I love to educate on and help my clients figure out. Can't write the prescription, but I certainly do a great deal of education on that.
Well, and I think the education piece is huge because there's so much controversy around the bioidentical hormone replacement. And I think sometimes that can scare women away from using it. And then I do think there tends to be this confusion between bioidentical hormone replacement and something like the birth control pill. And I just think the education piece is going to be huge for somebody to understand how it can help, how to use it, if it's even appropriate to use, and what the, potential long-term risks are, or maybe there are no long-term risks. So there is a lot of, I think, confusion around that topic that women can really benefit from education. And like you said, it's probably its own podcast episode to talk about bioidentical hormones and how they can play a role in women's health as they age. And like you said, I mean, it's always nice to do as much stuff naturally as possible. And we certainly want people to be able to set up a healthy foundation for themselves and do simple things like walking outside and, improving their sleep hygiene and keeping their blood sugar balanced with their food choices and all of that. But at the end of the day, if their hormones are extremely low and they're not coming up because of being in postmenopause, not having that ability to really produce those hormones, we can't just say, well, I guess that's just the way things are. And that's how you have to feel. If we do have that medical technology to be able to help women feel better and to really thrive in their postmenopausal years, as opposed to just kind of suffering through them. So, I think it's good to have that well-rounded approach where you're looking at both sides of it and you're giving women the best possible care to help them feel their best.
Yes, absolutely. Agree. In agreement. Yep. Thank you.
So just as we wrap things up, first of all, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. I think, again, I want to have this conversation about menopause more because there's so many women that are starting to go through it in my audience and maybe have been through it and just want to make sure that they're caring for their body through the process and feeling their best. What is your vision for the work that you're doing, and what impact do you hope to have on the world through your working with women in the menopause transition?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. So my vision is that women would go into menopause, embrace it as a natural phase of life, not be embarrassed to talk about it, not feel kind of remove the cultural bias against menopause. I want women to have the best care possible, and really for them to live the life that they want to live between ages 50 and 100. So that's my vision.
Awesome. I love it. And something that I ask everybody that comes on this show is, it's kind of out of left field sometimes, but there's no wrong answer. The question is, what makes a woman more than a body?
Wow. It's really her mind, really. Think about it. We connect with people through our mind. It's I'm not a super philosophical person, but I think it's it might be the seat of our soul. It's how we connect to other humans. It's how we think about ourselves. So I just really think what's going on between your ears is really what makes you more than a body. But yes, that was a bit of a trick question, Laura.
Well, like I said, there is no wrong answer. And I like to ask to get just a variety of different opinions on that topic, since part of my goal with this podcast is to help women know that they're more than a body. And even when we talk about topics like today, where we're talking about physical health and how to take care of your body, that we know that, no matter what your body is going through, that you're not just a body. And so I appreciate you playing along, and sorry for throwing you on, that unexpected curveball.
No, I loved it.
Awesome. Well, all that said, like I said, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. And for women who want to learn more about your work and to find out more about what you offer for, just helping women through that menopause transition, where can women find you?
So the best place to find me right now is on Instagram. And so I'm one half of a two-part team called Wise and Well. And that's because we feel like wisdom really precedes wellness. So Wise and Well on Instagram. And then we have a group coaching program called Mastering Midlife Mayhem, where we do mindset, for 2 weeks, nutrition specifically for midlife women for 4 weeks. And then the final 2 weeks of the program, we do a deep, deep, deep dive into your options on hormone therapy, why you would want to do it, how much you want to spend, what type of a doctor, do you want to do creams, pellets, injections, oral, and we help to connect you with a licensed professional who can help you with that. So it's mindset, nutrition, and a deep dive into hormone therapy, and we call that Master Midlife Mayhem. So people can find me at wiseandwell.me.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure that we have the link to your website and the program and your Instagram page. So that way women who are interested in learning more can find you and keep learning from you about all these really important topics surrounding menopause. Well, Maria, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was a pleasure to chat with you. And I know I learned some things about menopause that I didn't know before. So I really appreciate you coming to share your wisdom.
Well, I really, really appreciate you. And like you said, being in your early 30s and having this platform and being willing to discuss this, I got my hats off to you, Laura. Really appreciate you.
Well, I feel like there's so many things in women's health that are not adequately discussed, and I am game to talk about all of them, including menopause, even though, like I said, I'm a little bit, got hopefully at least a decade or so before I'm dealing with all the symptoms that you mentioned. But, I think the more women can learn about this stuff before it becomes something that they're dealing with, the better. So hopefully all my 20s and 30s listeners are taking notes and getting their mindset prepared for when this stuff is happening to them too. So anyway, thanks again, Maria. And thank you to everybody for hanging out with us for the last hour. And we will see you here next week on the Fed and Fearless podcast. Take care, everybody. Hey there, Laura here again. If you're anything like the hundreds of health and nutrition entrepreneurs that I've worked with over the past few years, you want to create an efficient, structured, and organized online health office that saves you time, maximizes your impact and your income, and provides a great experience for your clients. But maybe you've been told falsely that all you need is free tools like Google Calendar and Google Drive to make that happen. Or maybe you know that you need to use a client management software like Practice Better, but you feel overwhelmed trying to figure out how to set it up in a way that actually saves you time rather than wasting it. Either way, the fact is you need a well-oiled client management system, one that works for you like a team member if you want to have a successful online health and nutrition business. And in my brand new free training, I'm going to teach you the 6 essential steps to set up Practice Better for a more profitable and efficient virtual health and wellness business. I'll give you the step-by-step system for setting up your client management software that will get you out of the day-to-day admin work and back into the role of the high-level health and nutrition professional where you belong. I'll also show you how my client Jackie used these exact principles to help her make over $200,000 in revenue in her first full year of business, while also preparing to become a first-time mom. And by the end of this 60-minute training, you'll finally know the best way to create an efficient, structured, and organized online health office that saves you time, maximizes your impact and income, and provides an amazing front-end experience for your clients and customers. To get access to this exclusive brand new training, go to practicebettertraining.com and select the training day and time you'd like to attend. And don't worry if you can't make any of the times listed. We'll be sending the replay to all registrants, so just be sure to look for an email from hello@lauraschoenfeldrd.com to get your personal link to join the training. Having a well-organized client management system is a non-negotiable when it comes to building a financially successful online health business that doesn't burn you out. And I can't wait to show you the exact steps to doing so in the fastest and most efficient way possible. Go to practicebettertraining.com to sign up now, and I look forward to seeing you on the training.